Happy Septuagint Day! Let's continue comparing the Hebrew Masoretic with the Greek Septuagint by going through the New Testament and seeing which manuscript family the writers used when quoting from the Old Testament. In this video, we will be looking at Matthew chapters 4 to 5. The running count of verses will continue from the last video, but this time we will add a category for when the New Testament quotation agrees with both the Masoretic and the Septuagint. Matthew 4:4 is about Jesus' response to Satan's temptations. It reads, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." This is a quotation from Deuteronomy 8:3. The Masoretic reads, "Man does not live by bread only, but by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of Jehovah." The Masoretic says everything instead of every word, but this is okay, because both word and thing are implied by the Hebrew. Remember that Jehovah, Yahweh, and the Lord are all different ways to say the same thing in the Hebrew. However, Matthew said God, and not any of those. The Septuagint reads, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." Notice that the Septuagint explicitly includes word here. But the thing to take note of is that it says God instead of Jehovah, Yahweh, or the Lord. Matthew more closely follows the Septuagint there. In both the Hebrew and the Greek, Matthew switches around the order of the words, but other than that, his words are the exact same in the Septuagint. Matthew 4:6 is about when Satan quoted Scripture in order to tempt Jesus. It reads, "He shall give his angels charge concerning you, and on their hands they shall bear you up, lest you happen to dash your foot against a stone." This is a quotation from Psalms 91:11 and 12. The Masoretic reads, "He will give his angels charge over you. They shall bear you up in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone." The Masoretic reads nearly identical to Matthew's reading. The only difference is that the Masoretic does not include happen. Because the Septuagint numbers the Psalms differently, this is a quotation from Psalms 90:11 and 12, and it reads, "He shall give his angels charge concerning you, and they shall bear you up on their hands, lest at any time you dash your foot against a stone." In the Septuagint, it includes at any time, which is the exact same Greek word Matthew uses, which the ASV translated as happen. Because this word is missing in the Masoretic, and because Matthew's quotation is identical to the Septuagint, he follows the Septuagint's reading. Matthew 4:7 is about Jesus' response to Satan's temptation. It reads, "You shall not make trial of the Lord your God." This is a quotation from Deuteronomy 6:16. The Masoretic reads, "You shall not tempt Jehovah your God." The Septuagint reads, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God." The ASV translated the word trial instead of tempt, but these are the same words. Since all three passages agree, Matthew's reading follows the Septuagint and the Masoretic. Matthew 4:10 is about what Jesus said to Satan when being tempted. It reads, "You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." This is a quotation from Deuteronomy 6:13. The Masoretic reads, "You shall fear Jehovah your God, and him shall you serve." The second half in the Masoretic says nothing about serving God only. The Septuagint reads, "You will fear the Lord your God, and him only will you serve." Interestingly, though Breton translated only in this verse, it is not there in the Septuagint either. Both the Masoretic and the Septuagint say to fear God. However, Matthew said to worship God. For some reason, Jesus said worship instead of quoting fear from the Old Testament passage. Probably because worship is what Satan asked for in the previous verse. So in this case, the Masoretic and the Septuagint agree with each other, but they are not the same as Matthew's quotation. This is because I believe Jesus' words are intentionally different. He is loosely following both the Septuagint and the Masoretic. Matthew 4:15 and 16 are about when Jesus moved from Nazareth to Capernaum. It reads, "The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, toward the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people that sat in darkness saw a great light, and to them that sat in the region and the shadow of death, to them did light spring up." This is a quotation from Isaiah 9, 1 and 2. The Masoretic reads, "The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the latter time has he made it glorious, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them has the light shined." The Septuagint reads, "O land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, and the rest inhabiting the sea coast, and the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. O people walking in darkness, behold a great light. You that dwell in the region and the shadow of death, a light shall shine upon you." The Septuagint says the people are walking in darkness, while Matthew says the people are sitting in darkness. Also, the phrase following Zebulun and Naphtali, and preceding the Jordan, is different between them all. Which reading is Matthew following? In some ways, neither, and in some ways, both. Let's say that Matthew is following both, pulling from both manuscript families. Matthew 5:21 is part of the Sermon on the Mount. In his teaching on murder and anger, Jesus quotes the Old Testament. He said, "You have heard that it was said of them of old time, You shall not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment." This is a quotation from Exodus 20:13 and Deuteronomy 5:17. The Masoretic reads, "You shall not kill." The Septuagint reads, "You shall not kill." Of course, being such a short verse and part of the 10 Commandments, also called the Decalogue, we should expect that all manuscripts of Scripture should keep this commandment unchanged through all the centuries and millennia and copyists. All manuscripts are in agreement. Matthew 5:27 is in the same situation. In Jesus' teaching on adultery and lust, he said, "You have heard it was said, You shall not commit adultery." This is a quotation from Exodus 20:14. The Masoretic reads, "You shall not commit adultery." Both Exodus 20:14 and Deuteronomy 5:18 in the Septuagint read, "You shall not commit adultery." Jesus' quotation of Exodus 20:14 agrees in all manuscripts. Matthew 5:31 and 5:33 look like quotations from the law. However, Jesus doesn't quite quote them directly. He refers to them by condensing them into fewer words without changing the meaning. Matthew 5:31 is a condensation of Deuteronomy 24:1. Matthew 5:33 is a condensation of Exodus 19:12, Numbers 30 verse 2, and Deuteronomy 23:21. These verses do not help us compare the Septuagint and the Masoretic because they are not direct quotations. We will skip them. Matthew 5:38 is a quotation which begins Jesus' teaching on non-resistance. He said, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." This is a quotation from Exodus 21:24, Leviticus 24:20, and Deuteronomy 19:21. Just like with the previous verses from the 10 Commandments, there is no difference between any manuscript. The only exception is that Jesus adds the word "and," which does not appear in Hebrew nor Greek. But this has very little significance. For example, Jesus could be quoting two separate statements, as it is shown here, denoted by the question marks. In the end, all manuscripts agree. Matthew 5:43 is Jesus' last quotation in his Sermon on the Mount. As he begins to teach about loving your enemies, he said, "You have heard that it was said, Love your neighbor, and hate your enemy." This is a quotation from Leviticus 19:18. The Masoretic reads, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." The Septuagint reads, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus just quotes a very small portion of the verse, and all manuscripts are in agreement. That is enough for now, but we will continue looking at New Testament quotations from the Old Testament next year. The next time Matthew quotes from the Old Testament is in chapter 8. Blessings, and so forth.